from MS18. He's a third year physics major. He'll be presenting his talk on mathematical modeling of biological systems. So Alhad, whenever you are ready, you can start the talk.
Yeah, hello. I'll keep the video on. I think it'll only show in the corner, so it shouldn't be too distracting. So, hello everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm sure you're all missing something really important to attend this. Um, so I guess I'll just start without any further ado, and I'd request that questions be asked at the end, or like put them in the chat and I'll answer them later, so I can continue the talk in a single flow. Um, I shall share screen. I'm sorry about the mistake in the date. Just ignore that. So am I visible and audible?
Yes, Alhad. The screen is also visible.
Yeah. Um, okay, so I'll start. Right. So I had done this as the topic of my summer project during the pandemic summer. Um, it was with Professor Sanjay Puri from JNU, and he was the one who suggested this as the topic of my project. So the project basically involved me reading a book called Mathematical Biology by J.D. Murray, and it was entirely a reading, mostly a reading based project with some coding. And the coding was also basically to generate some graphs, which you will see later on the slides. So it's not something that that's at a research level. It's just anything you can find online, and it's a very in-depth subject. So what I'm going to show today is like the very basic, very surface level, very introductory thing, and there's a lot of um, more stuff to it. And if you're interested, then maybe after this you can check it out. Essentially, there's going to be two different components, which is single species models and interacting populations. There's so the first one is essentially one ODE, which is one ordinary differential equation, and the second one involves two or more ODEs, but typically two. Um, and even if you don't know how to solve it, that's okay. When I started this project, I had no idea either, and it doesn't involve really solving it. So as you'll see. Um, right. So before even going into any specific models or uh, what the thing is, I'm just going to talk a bit about the philosophy of doing modeling. And the basic idea is that given a system, you have to describe it in such a way that you can use your model. Oh, by the way, what's on the slide is going to be a really small section of it. I'm going to be speaking most of the time. So if I'm not audible, please let me know. Right. So yeah, so the idea is that you have some system, and the system is generally really complicated. Sometimes you can. So what you want to do is that you need to get insight into the system so that you can either change it or even at the basic level understand it. So when you create a mathematical or computational model, the idea is to have some sort of a predictive power so that you can look at the model, make predictions about the system, then test that experimentally, and uh, use that to either refine your model or say discard it. One of the things is that your model does not need to be perfectly accurate. It doesn't need to describe every single little detail of the system, because in some cases that's just completely impossible. The amount of incorporating every single variable into your model, like trying to model the exact spread of COVID-19 in every single country, taking into account every single small change in spatial distribution, is not something that can be done. And it's not particularly useful either. So that's why you don't, it's okay if your model is only an approximation, but there are still certain features of the system that it brings out. So one of the things is that when you are modeling, you want to have some parameters in your model that you can vary. These are you don't want to have too many of them. So I'm just going to share a story here. So from physics. So Dyson was a famous physicist, and he had gone to Fermi and asked Fermi about some theory he was working on, some model. And Fermi barely took a look at the thing before he essentially told Dyson that his model wasn't that good because it used too many parameters. The exact quote he used was this: I remembered my friend Johnny von Neumann, another physicist, used to say, with 4 parameters, I can fit an elephant, and with 5, I can make him wiggle his trunk. So the idea is that if you have too many parameters, you can essentially model almost anything. And unless those parameters also have relevant meanings, you won't get insight into the underlying mechanism, which is part of what your goal is. And ultimately, you want to understand the model system, and that is why this is done. And many of the things that are covered in this talk aren't necessarily just related to physics or biology. Even there's some part of it will talk about chemical reactions, so there's also chemistry, but these sort of techniques are also applied in certain fields in social sciences. So it's a very diverse interdisciplinary field. So the top type of models I'll be focusing on involve time evolution. As I mentioned in the abstract, you have details about the system in its current state, and you want to find out what will happen after a time. In physics, this is something we encounter all the time, but even in biology, I think at least COVID-19 has made it obvious that this is an important thing. Like, how if the disease, there are only 3 people infected right now, what will happen after in some time t? Or if there is a population that only has a few members, what will happen after uh, some another time? And what will happen if you now make some changes to that thing? Um, Also, I'll be covering deterministic models. Generally, stochastic models are more complicated. Again, I think with COVID, this is something people would have seen, that when countries are initially infected, their trajectories of how many people are infected are a bit varied. But after a point, they sort of follow similar patterns. So when you have a large number of people, you can sort of approximate it and say that, okay, deterministic models work. And smaller numbers, you generally prefer stochastic. But then sometimes, even when you're looking at the broad scale, stochastic models can be better. So one of the main things, like a mathematical principle behind analyzing a model, is non-dimensionalization. So the idea is that you have set up your model, which is your ordinary differential equations, and inside in the equations are present some certain number of parameters which have some relevant meaning. Normally, non-dimensionalization gives 2 advantages. The first is that it makes doing calculations, doing the algebra easier. Instead of having to work with 3 or 4 variables, you now need to work with 1 or 2, and that generally makes the chance of errors less. The other thing, and the more important one, is that it tells you exactly how the model system depends on the parameters. So I'll demonstrate it with an example. So this is a model. Here R is some sort of a per capita. Okay, so N is the number of individuals of some species, some, let's say, anything, and some animal or plant or fungi or whatever. R is what is called the per capita birth rate. It is very commonly seen in biological models. It is just the births minus the deaths per individual. Here, A and N are some parameters that depend on the ecology, and they govern the dynamics of the population in some certain way. So, as you can see, if N is really large, then it decreases the growth rate. And when N is equal to B, the growth rate is maximum, it's just Rn. So again, if you do the algebra here and you make these relevant changes, where u equal to under root a by Rn, k is equal to b times under root a by r, and t is equal to rt, you can do the algebra yourself by screenshotting it. You'll find that this is the equation you get. And already, instead of like having to work with three different parameters. You now only need to work with one, which is k. And after you have solved the thing, you can always substitute this back in to see what changes you can make. I'll come to this specific model in more detail later. So I think just remember this part and what k is. Okay. So another thing is that um, you will not generally encounter differential equations that can be solved analytically exactly. So even the pendulum that we solve, we take a small angle approximation and say that sine theta is theta. Um, this is what is called the phase portrait of the pendulum. And here there is no small angle approximation. It takes the full thing. So what a phase portrait is that I give it a bunch of initial values. So x-axis is the starting position, and the y-axis, sorry, not starting, just the position, and the y-axis is the momentum. Both of these have been non-dimensionalized. And what you have is that I take a bunch of points of position and momentum, which is analogous to, like, say you can start a pendulum from here or here or here. You can see my hand, right? Somebody?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, and I can just start it by letting go, or I can give it some sort of push which imparts some initial momentum. So what I've done is I've taken a lot of these values of position and momentum and I've plotted this. This is also the relation to physics. This thing is known as a phase plane. And this is something that's encountered in physics a lot later. So if anybody's from MS 19 or 20, this is something you'll do in detail in your first semester of physics majors. And so, yeah, so basically, here there's not much I want to talk about, just the idea that using a computer, you can get the trajectories of a full pendulum, which is really hard to do just mathematically, because solving the differential equation that also has that sine theta part is, I don't think there is any solution. Um, as in any solution you can just write down analytically. Right. So first, going on to single species models. Okay, so body slide, but what you have is that you take the thing and you write down some differential equation for it. This is generally obtained from experiments. You don't necessarily need to have a differential equation. There are some cases where you can have discrete time steps. So if you're modeling an insect where the life cycle is such that you have larvae and then they become pupae, then adults, and then adults lay eggs. So you have some sort of a distinct generation. So then this type of thing can be a better approximation of your system. If you're say modeling some sort of an animal, this can be better. Exponential growth, I think most people would have heard of. It's just unbounded growth. It's also known as Malthusian growth. And logistic growth is, again, I think some people would have heard of it in the context of COVID. It's what happens when there is a carrying capacity or a maximum capacity that the system can carry, because of which the exponential, it begins as an exponential and then slows down. Worrell's process we'll see later. And recur is very similar to Verrell's, and it at least for our batch was covered in Bio 212. So I'm not going to go into detail on that here. So because we are now modeling biology, these models typically have unstable fixed points as n equal to 0. That's because when you have no species, their population doesn't grow. Unstable because it doesn't necessarily have to be unstable. So, okay, wait. So before that fixed point is when your this capital F of n becomes 0, or n of t plus 1 is equal to nt. So f of nt with small changes to the population at that point. if it's stable, then it returns back to it. If it's unstable, then it goes away from it. This is something I'll cover in more detail. But this is a basic biological assumption, most of these models. Another thing is that when you are modeling this, it can often happen that your value of n, capital N or nt, is 0.01 or something, some fraction. This is called the problem of Atto-Foxes, where when your any species that is less than 1 has to necessarily become extinct. And if it's sexually reproducing, then it has to be at least 2. And this is one of the drawbacks of these type of models. But you can always fix that by changing the dynamics such that for low values, it goes back to 0 and the species does become extinct. So you have a lot of freedom in choosing what the models are. It's something you decide, and your aim is to try and fit it to what system, what data you have best. Okay, so as I mentioned, to find the fixed points in continuous models, you just simply equate f of n to 0. That means dn by dt is 0 and n is constant. If you want to check the stability, okay, so imagine I have n number of species and I make a small change to it. I add a, say, as small an individual as possible. And what will happen is that you want to now find out, will it increase or will it decrease? So the mathematics that describes these sort of changes is calculus. So f dash n is is the df by dn. And essentially what you're checking is that if you make a small increase and your derivative is negative, that means it will go back in this direction. It forces the function to go back. And if your derivative is positive and you make a small increase, then it will just keep on increasing from that point and not return back. And if your change is negative and you say reduce some of the population, then the signs work out in such a way that the opposite happens. So just the derivative at that point, whatever your fixed point is, if it's positive, then it's unstable, and if it's negative, then it's stable. I've given a heuristic explanation, but this can again be mathematically shown. For discrete models, what you do is you equate f of nt to nt, as I said. What for stability, it's slightly different. So what you do is, again, you find f dash nt and you call it lambda. Here I'm just naming it. And you check the value of lambda. So for discrete, it's again slightly different. Here, because you're talking about the change, and here it's not exactly the rate of, here on the LHS, you have the rate of change. Here on the LHS, you only directly have the output. So what happens is that when the modulus of lambda is less than 1, you have stability. When it's greater than 1, it's unstable. And when it's equal to 1, you have something called a bifurcation, which again, I'll come to in a bit. Again, this also can be shown mathematically, but I'm not doing that right now. But just take my word for it, or Google it, read a book or anything else. Just okay, yeah. So just giving a simple example of logistic growth, you start with this equation. This is the thing that is given to you. R again is the per capita growth rate. And what you now have is a minus r n squared by k term, which decreases the growth rate. So as you can see here, when n is greater than k, this entire thing becomes negative. So in a long enough time, no matter what your initial conditions are, it will tend to k. And when you do this non-dimensionalization, this is what you get. Now U here acts as a fraction, the population as a fraction of the carrying capacity, which is k. Again, you can, again, you see that there's two possible zeros, two possible fixed points, which is when u equal to 0 and u equal to 1. And again, doing the simple calculus I mentioned earlier, you can see that u equal to 0 is unstable, while u equal to 1 is stable. And here I've just shown that graphically. Starting from this point, the population will increase in time to this point, which is 1. Okay, so back to the model I'd mentioned earlier. What you now have is something known as a threshold phenomenon. So as I mentioned, the analysis with calculus I did, it's for infinitesimal changes where you make a really, really small change. But it's possible that you somehow make a very large change, which would be known as a discrete change. So you could always say just double the population by introducing a bunch of new insects, for example. Um, okay, so going on to this equation, you just do the analysis as mentioned. You try and find the fixed points first. That's step one. So you equate this to 0. One of the u factors out, so this becomes 0. And you have u minus k whole squared, which has, 1 minus u minus k whole squared, which has two zeros at k minus 1 and k plus 1. Now you find df by du, which is the second step to check for stability. And this is what you get. When you replace the different values of the fixed points, which is u equal to 0, k minus 1, and k plus 1, you get different values of f dash. So at u equal to 0, f dash is 1 minus k squared, which means that if k is greater than 1, this is negative and hence becomes stable. And if k is less than 1, then it's positive and hence unstable. Here, to have this as a possible solution, so u can't be negative because that doesn't make any biological sense. So k has to be greater than 1. And if k is greater than 1, then this means that f dash is positive and therefore this is unstable. The third one is always negative and therefore always stable. So now imagine that u is the population of some sort of a pest. And what you want to do is reduce the number of reduce the population of the pest for whatever reason. And now you have this model. How do you use it to actually make a change? Well, for one, you want this value to be stable, because if it's unstable, that is k is less than 1, then this isn't a possible value. So the only fixed point is that u equal to k plus 1, which is a large value when the pest is very prevalent in your system. So what you want to do is increase the value of k so that this becomes stable. And now you can go back to the, you can replace k for what it is. So, and if you remember, okay, so it depended on, I think, b under root a by r. So r is intrinsic, it's the population's own thing. And let's say you can't change r. So you can change either b or you can change a. Now you know that it depends on the linearly with b, but only on the square root of a. So now you know that making a change to b will have more of an effect on the model than making a change to a would. So you can vary the environment in such a way that d becomes really high, and therefore this becomes negative and this becomes stable, which causes the population to go extinct. This second one doesn't really factor in because it's always unstable. But what happens is that because it's an unstable point in the middle of two fixed points, so let's say 0, k minus 1, and k plus 1, k minus 1 acts as the threshold, because there is no way that increasing population can cross k minus 1. Because when it hits k minus 1, it'll du by dt becomes 0 and it'll stop changing. Same with the opposite direction. So what happens is that depending on whether your initial population is greater than k minus 1 or less than k minus 1, your final value of the population is decided. So what you want the current population to be is to be less than k minus 1, and if it is, then great, the pest goes extinct. But if it happens that it's greater than k minus 1, then you have a problem. Okay, so one of the things that specifically happens, now talking about discrete models, is that even in one variable, when you're only dealing with one species, you can have chaos. This is again something that's covered in 212, at least it was for us. So I won't discuss it in too much detail. But here, just from look, and this is what is the I had called earlier as a Verrall's process. Um, so this is what the model is. As you can see, it's a discrete version of the logistic equation. And instantly you can see that there's two possible zeros, which is nt equals 0 and nt equals r minus 1 by r. Again, you find the zeros by saying nt is equal to rnt into 1 minus nt. I had defined lambda earlier as f dash nt, so you can again find the value of lambda for two different for the different values of nt. So what happens is that r is positive, so it starts increasing. And depending on the value of r, the system can show very different kind of behavior. So when r equals to 3, something really interesting happens, which is that both of these states are now unstable. As you can see here, lambda is 3 and here lambda is minus 1. And if you increase r more, it will become less than minus 1. So the modulus will be more than 1. So both of these states are unstable. Now what happens is that at this point, you can iterate the map again. So here in this equation, instead of nt, you replace nt plus 1 and then use this formula to expand. And this is what you get. So when you solve this equation by saying nt is equal to r of this thing in the brackets, you will get, along with the two earlier solutions, you get two more solutions. And for a while, these two solutions are stable. And what happens is that the system keeps on alternating between these two. So it will be at, say, one value, and then next step it will be at here, then here, then here. And depending on how r increases, the entire thing has a very um, different dynamics. So this is for different values of r. I thought the captions are missing. I'm sorry. But here r is equal to 1, here r is 2, here r is 3, and you have what is the bifurcation. And at r equals 4, you have just complete chaos. So at r equal to 1, again, if you go back to the model, you will be able to see that the population goes extinct. For r equal to 2, it has some fixed point. R equal to 3, it has this oscillations. Here the oscillations are decreasing, and at time equal to infinity, they will go to a single point. But if you make it say 3.0001, then what you will have is these oscillations will stop decreasing and they'll just switch between two values. And what happens is that as r increases, you have more and more bifurcations. So instead of two fixed values, now get 4, 8, 16, so on. What happens is that sometimes you have an odd bifurcation. So it doesn't increase neatly in powers of 2. And if you have one of these, and there is a theorem that says that if at any point you have a 3 cycle, which is say 1, 2, 3, then 1, 2, 3, your system will eventually become chaotic. So on the next slide is a map of what happens. So again, some of you would have seen this before, but this is the increasing value of r, and this is u, and this represents the fixed points in a certain sense. So here there's only one fixed point, nothing is happening. At r equal to 3, as predicted, you now have two different things, and they just keep on increasing until here you have another bifurcation, and that keeps on going on. And as you had seen, r equal to 4, there's complete chaos. Here again, there's complete chaos. Beyond r equal to 4, the population actually becomes negative, and that creates some problems. So it's not worth pursuing. But what happens is that you can actually mathematically show that at r equal to 4, it is the most chaotic state, as in it has the highest entropy. Okay, so now moving on to interacting populations. Okay, so again, a wordy slide, but take it step by step. So now you have two coupled differential equations. So du by dt equals f of u comma v, and dv by dt is comma v. then you want to both to get the fixed point. And therefore you will get some value of 1 4 different. So in case there is somebody from MS-20 who doesn't know, del f by del u means that you're taking a derivative of f with respect to u while keeping v constant. And similarly, del f by del v is a derivative of f with respect to v while keeping u constant. So again, I'm not showing how this is the case, but it can be proved that what you want is that the eigenvalues of this matrix need to be negative. If you don't know what eigenvalues are, again, MS-20, I think you would have done this in linear algebra, but just in case, the eigenvalues being negative is equivalent to the condition that the determinant of the matrix is positive and the trace is negative. So the determinant is just the product of these two terms, del f by del u and del g by del v, minus del f by del v into del g by del u. That's the determinant and it should be positive. The trace is del f by del u plus del g by del v, just the sum of the terms on this diagonal, and that should be negative. Again, I haven't shown this, but it's really simple to show that this is exactly the same as the eigenvalues being negative. Right. So this is what you do when you have to find stability in such a case. So yeah. So in biology, the most basic equations of interacting populations are called the Lotka-Volterra equations. So what they represent is that there is a prey N and a predator who, well, obviously eats the prey. So the original equations they had I think Lotka gave them and Volterra analyzed them, is this: dn by dt equals n minus np, and dp by dt equals alpha pn minus alpha p. So here n and p are both already non-dimensionalized. They had given it with more parameters, but again, it doesn't really matter because in the end, you're always working with the non-dimensional form. So what these qualitatively mean is that dn by dt equal to n is just normal growth, normal exponential growth. dn by, and you also have a minus np term. So the more predators there are, the more the prey gets eaten, and the more prey there is, it's easier for the predators to find prey and therefore prey again get eaten more. Alpha here is a parameter that tells you how much of the prey being eaten is converted into energy. So alpha pn, alpha is so bit, as a result, alpha is between 0 and 1. And yeah, so the predator only grows in population when it has access to prey. Without that, there is a exponential decrease, which is dp by dt is equal to minus alpha p. This is a very simple, very unrealistic situation. If you solve these equations, what you get is you get fixed loops, and it's not these exact loops in phase space, which means that both the populations are just oscillating. They're repeating the same path, which is not something that's typically seen in real systems. So the strength and popularity of these models is based on the fact that you can actually vary these models and create a general equation which can be used to model different types of situations. Yeah, so for example, instead of just say modeling prey or predator interactions, you can represent other ecological phenomena like competition or mutualism. So competition is basically say two herbivores that are competing for the same food source. Okay, so there should have been equations here. I think I've forgotten to add them. So sorry about that, but yeah. So what would happen is that in the absence of any competition, you would have both of these having a population of 1. But the moment you have competition, they decrease. Here, orange is better at competing than blue, therefore orange ends up having a higher population. Okay. What is happening? Okay, I have no idea what happened. Give me a second. Um, is the screen visible again?
Yes, sir. Hi.
Okay. Um, right. So the other thing is mutualism, which is when instead of working against each other, the two are working with each other. So say one species eats uh, it's so basically what happens that they both work together in order to increase their total population. So again, here in the absence of any interaction, it would be one. With interaction, their population has increased. So yeah, it would have been better if the equations had been here, but these you can just vary these equations and change their form to model a large variety of situations. Um, right. How much time do I have, by the way?
You can take till 7:15 minutes.
Okay. So, right. So here it's a bit of a sidestep into chemistry. So this sort of modeling of dynamics can often be used to also model chemical reactions. So I'm not going to discuss in detail what um, the reactions exactly are. So there is this thing known as the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction, and it's fairly famous. And what you do is that the reaction, I think it has 5 different components, and so instead of modeling all 5, you simplify it, and you only take say 2 or 3 or 4, and you model that instead. So you get some aspect of that reaction. So I will be discussing one of these simplifications of the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction. To understand that, there's first a theorem. So let's take this step by step. So the theorem states that for a system of coupled ordinary differential equations du by dt, here u is a vector where each component of the vector represents the species, or what the different species. So first, different chemical species here, and that is equal to a function of u, which is again the vector. Um, and you have a steady state u equal to 0, where each of the populations is 0. 0 isn't necessary. You can always just do a translation and get something else. So the theorem is that so what happens is that you have a bunch of eigenvalues of this matrix, and these co- uh, these con- these eigenvalues can be real or complex. However, the trace, which is the sum of all the diagonal elements, has to be real. Therefore, these eigenvalues will always occur in complex conjugates, which is a plus ib and a minus ib. So when you add them, you just get 2a, which is real. Um, so what you do is you take the pair of complex conjugate eigenvalues with the largest real part. So if it's the largest and let's say it's negative, then all others will also be negative. And that is the condition for stability. The moment one of them becomes positive, one of the eigenvalues, then it's no longer stable. So what you have is that for if so alpha is a parameter, and if alpha is less than alpha c, where c is critical, then what you get is that and okay, so if alpha is less than alpha c, then the real part should be negative, real part of the largest eigenvalue. If it's equal to the alpha c, then the real part of the largest eigenvalue is 0 and the imaginary part is not 0. If it's greater than alpha c, then the real part is greater than 0. So if these 3 conditions are satisfied, then what happens is that just when alpha is greater than alpha c, instead of, so before that it's stable because all of them are negative, And the moment it is slightly higher, it is unstable, but now you have oscillations. So the limit cycle stable periodic solution means that it will now just start oscillating. And the period is given by this, the 2 pi divided by the imaginary part of lambda at alpha c. So what you need is alpha is greater than alpha c, but alpha minus alpha c is much, much less than 1. So using this theorem, we will look at one of the simplifications of the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction, which is the Brusselator. So these are the equations for that. And when u equal to 1 or v equal to b by a, that is only when both of these turn to 0. Again, you can just fit the values in and check that right now. You find out the stability matrix, which is taking partial derivatives on both, as mentioned earlier. So again, so the determinant here is b minus 1 into minus a, which is minus ab plus a, minus of minus ba, which is plus ab. So all you have is a plus a term here, and since a is always greater than 0, this determinant is always greater than 0. So only other condition is that the trace needs to be negative. So you have b minus a minus 1 is less than 0. So what happens is that for, okay, so here blue and orange are the two differences, u and v. And this is a plot of u versus v. Here it's the x-axis is time and y-axis is the amount. Here the x-axis is u and the y-axis is v. Same with here. So what happens is that for a equal to 1 and b equal to 1.9, which here becomes I think minus 0.1, this is stable. So eventually they will oscillate and go back to a stable. The reason the oscillations are there is that there is some complex eigenvalue, which is what is causing the oscillations. The moment it increases to 2.1, so that the trace is now positive, you have these sort of oscillations. So the idea here is that you can sort of model a large variety of phenomena, and including, say, things like oscillations. So just showing more stuff like that. Here is an example of chaos. So Lorenz, in the late 1800s or so, it was believed that you need a lot of different variables in order to have chaos. Lorenz came up and set up this simple differential equation where there's only 3 different terms, but you still have a really chaotic thing. So this green, orange, and in the background, you can see traces of blue that's more or less covered by orange. And this doesn't show up in biology, it shows up in atmospheric dynamics. But just trying to show that you can use simple equations like these to model a large number of phenomena. So the value of A, B, and C I took from the internet. They were the same values that Lorenz had used. And you can find the Wikipedia article on this. The article has ready-made code that you can copy, paste, and run. I did it in my own code, but I mean, if somebody wants to try it out, you can. There was one for Python, so I think that should be accessible to everybody. And there is some really nice graphs this type of system can be used to make. Another thing is the van der Pol oscillator. So here the cool thing is that you have this entirely continuous equation where this is continuous, this is continuous, but you still get this sort of a behavior where you have a really sharp jump where and even here you get some really sharp jumps. So you can use this sort of, so it's not something you would imagine could be modeled by continuous differential equations, and but turns out that it can. So I think I am almost out of time, so I'm just quickly going to talk about disease spread. So this is the most basic model called the SIR. It makes a lot of assumptions. So it assumes that the once you get infected, you recover. Okay, so S is the susceptible population, I is the infected population, the ones that have an infection, and R is the refractory population, which is you had the infection, now you've recovered, and that's it. Now you're completely fine and you'll never get infected again, which is not something that happens with all diseases. The other thing it assumes is something known as well mixed. So the population is homogeneously and isotropically spread around in space, which again doesn't happen. You have cities and you have rural areas where the population density is very different. And um, it also assumes that the population is completely constant. There's no birth or death. People aren't moving around at all. It's just completely static. But it's still sort of like the most baseline model. You start with this and then you vary things depending on how your exact diseases can be described. So what you have is the susceptibles will so the decrease in the susceptibles is equal to RSI, where so the more infected people you have, the faster the infection will spread. R is a parameter that here tells you the average number of people that get infected given a certain number of S and I. So the change in the number of infecteds is RSI minus AI. A here is the average time of the disease. Again, this can be shown. And sorry, 1 by is the average time of the disease. So what happens is that equal to RSI, the number of infected individuals increase, and as they recover, this is the rate at which they drop out. dr by dt equal to AI. So just once you have the infection and you recover, you are the so susceptibles here are represented by blue, infected by orange, and refractory or recovered by green. So the main equation here is this too. So if I can be cancelled out. So if RS is greater than A, which or alternatively RS by A is greater than 1, what happens is that your population will start, sorry, the number of infecteds will increase. If RS by A is less than 1 or RS is less than A, then it will decrease. So I've just graphed two different situations here. So this value RS by A is known as R, capital R, not to be confused with the refractory population. R naught simply means that, or S naught simply means that this is the value at the initial stage, the initial condition. So what happens here is that first the number of infected individuals increases and then falls, and this is what is an epidemic. And here the disease remains endemic because not 1. As you can see here, the number of susceptible individuals does decrease, but the number of infected is almost 0. So here the situation is such that nobody has any immunity to the disease. Here the fact that it starts from 0.5 could represent that half the population has already been vaccinated. Yeah, so but the thing, so and in relation to COVID, I'm sure you've heard of R naught a lot in the past 1 year. Yeah, but the important thing to remember here is that this is a very simple model and doesn't always accurately, it won't always accurately reflect what is happening with COVID. And so, like all the models I've shown have been very simple, but you can always just change around with it and play with it and get a better fit for what you have. Yeah, that's all, I guess. Thanks. If there's any questions, I'll take them.
Thank you, Alha. So it is open for questions. I have seen a few questions in the chat. If people are still around, you can ask.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you manage to plot the Verhulst process? Did you use recursion for that?
Yeah, I think I would have. I don't remember now. It was a while back. It was
Because
last.
I tried the same thing with recursion and it just took a lot of time to plot. So could you maybe share your code for that?
Sure. You can, I don't know, message me on WhatsApp or something and I can share it there.
Okay.
Or I don't know. Or you can find me on Discord if you're on the
Yeah.
Discord channel.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And
Yeah.
one more thing, that community matrix that you showed to find
Ah.
the stability, that's just the Jacobian, right?
Yeah, but okay, so it's in the context of biology, it's called the community matrix.
Acha, okay. Thanks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Udbhash from MS20. So you talked about a chaotic state, right? So what does a chaotic state mean from a biological perspective? I mean, in terms of the population.
Okay, so are you asking that when will a biological population be described by chaos?
Exactly, right.
Yeah, so it's not exactly chaos, but what happens is that there are situations where the population changes really drastically. So I'm stealing this example from NGP sir. He used this example when he was teaching us about chaos in, again, 212. So he'd given an example of an island, I think in the northern Atlantic near USA, and he was talking about this population of moose on the island. So the moose weren't originally belonging to the island, but they had been sent there for some reason. And the island had these things called lichens. Well, I don't remember what, but they had something that the moose ate. So what happened was that the population of the moose really started. So it at first it was just increasing a bit, and they were doing periodic checks at regular intervals. So what happened was that the population went from, say, like 20 to 50 to 30, and then it suddenly jumped up to, say, 1,000. And the next time they checked, the moose had all gone extinct. So the biological explanation here is that the huge amount of moose that were there, they just finished all the food source. The food source wasn't able to grow back in time to sustain that large population. So what happened was at the end, all the moose ended up dying. So it's not exactly chaos, but you do have large jumps that are sometimes seen in biological populations. So where it was just increasing at first and then suddenly it just dropped down. And that's something that that specific Wallace model can emulate for a certain value of R.
Okay, I kind of understand. My second question is about the infectious disease model that you showed.
Yeah.
Does the R not correspond to the reproductive number?
Yeah. That is what.
Okay.
So
okay, thank you.
That is what you would have heard of in the context of COVID.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much for your talk.
Yeah, welcome. Anybody else?
If there are no other talk, we can wrap it up. Okay. So thank you, Alhad, for your talk. It was very interesting, and I would like to thank all the everyone who have joined. So thank you, guys. See you next time.